Welcome to Grail Country. I have Shari and Michael with me yet again as we continue our journey and exploration into Valentin Tomberg's Meditations on the Tarot. This time we are dealing with letter 19, the Sun.
Mm-hmm.
And this, I'm just really quick, I'm just going to open it up to you, just like to give a quick overview of what stood out to you, where you think that we should start the discussion. Um, uh, Either one of you.
I'm going to let Michael take the wheel there.
You're gonna let the Sophiologist take the wheel on letter 19? Imagine that.
Well, this is where Valentin Tomberg shows all of his cards.
Yeah, he really does.
He really does. And and this is, I mean, but the thing is, we talked before, right? He's been kind of dropping hints. He's heading in this direction through the whole book, right? In some chapters, some letters more than others. But he's, in a way, the telos of this book is is a revelation of Sophia.
Right.
Um,
It's interesting to me, Michael. Tell me what you think of this. I think it's important. It's not accident. It's very important that the primary subject of this letter, although this is certainly where he outs himself as a Sophiologist, but the primary thing that he's talking about is intuition. And I think that's not the fact that he's talking about intuition, and the way he talks about how dogmatic development happens, and the fact that this is the chapter where he outs himself as a Sophiologist. I don't think those things are incidental.
No.
And I think it's connected to the idea of the hiddenness of the divine feminine.
Yes. But also, I mean, this is what do you know who Roger Buck is, right?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
He's a friend of mine. And in fact, I just got an email about him. Somebody, you know James Tunney, you know who that is? We interviewed him twice on the podcast. He's an Irish mystic and philosopher. He's a really smart guy. But he emailed me this morning to see, do you know this Roger Buck fellow? And in fact, I do. But here's the thing, right? And Roger is all in with Valentin Tomberg. But here's the thing, I mean, and especially in this chapter,
he be converted to Catholicism because of Tomberg,
yes,
right?
And a lot of people did. So did Robert Powell, actually. But
yeah,
it's not uncommon. But here's the thing for me, right? And this came up with me when I gave a lecture for the Institute for Orthodox Christian Studies at Cambridge back in September. It was a conference on Pavel Florensky, and they wanted to have like the perspective of an Orthodox keynote speaker, an Anglican keynote speaker who ended up being John Milbank, and I was supposed to be the representative of the Catholic Church. I'm like, I don't know if they're okay. I'll do it. I don't know. I'm not. No one's gonna appoint me representative, but my one of my arguments in that lecture I gave was that, you know what, maybe Florensky is a heretic, and we should stop print. Now depending on what you mean by that, right? According to the rules of the game, he's a heretic, right? Just like Bulgakov, if you're going according to the rules of the game, he's a heretic. And so is Valentin Tomberg. I mean, not just with Sophia, but with all the stuff with magic and astrology, etc. Right? Uh, in a strict sense. And I do think that Tomberg, one of his intentions through this entire book is to introduce into, like you're talking about dogma, Nate, right? To maybe sow the seeds for a future dogma regarding Sophia in the Catholic Church, which
well,
is
he's
cool.
putting dogma in its place.
Well, there's that.
What he's saying is that the liturgy and the prayers contain things that dogma cannot yet imagine.
Mm-hmm. But the point I'm trying to make is that, but nevertheless, in the context of the contemporary moment, both ours and when Tomberg was writing, he's dropping some heretical bombs if you're going to be, and this is why Tomberg scares off some really, kind of. It's weird because Tomberg attracts and repels certain aspects of the traddy side of things. You know
So
what I mean?
someone actually sent Paul Vanderklay a copy of Meditations on. It wasn't me. Is the weird? But someone actually sent him a copy of Meditations on the Tarot. And you can, I had he mentioned it in a conversation I had with him recently about hell, and I could just tell that he was both intrigued and repelled at the same time.
Oh yeah, yeah. A Calvinist? You kidding me? Yeah, he'd have had just a hard time with Mary, right? But yeah, I mean that's the thing, right? And that's kind of what's interesting about the phenomenon of Valentin Tomberg is he does it. I mean, some of the people who are into Tomberg, like Roger, are you know straight up traddies,
Yeah,
Latin
he's
mass,
very
you
yeah,
know. But on the other hand, there are some tradies who would look at this and just be aghast.
correct.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yep.
So it's kind of weird.
I'm thinking about right
Because
now.
there's, especially since there's such an evangelical influence on the tradies. Like the tradies are just
Well,
like
they're all most of them are
evangelicals with Catholic
ex-evangelicals.
trappings.
It's true. A lot of them are disaffected Protestants, I think.
Right. And then I think
I,
you have people that are very, very much in love with and dedicated to the beauty of the traditional Latin Mass who aren't really tradies in any other sense.
Yeah,
It's interesting.
and also see you see that with the Ortho Bros too, right? that
Yeah.
and it's a weird phenomenon. I mean, not like we're off topic already, but it is a weird phenomenon that where people kind of adhere to a certain you can almost call it a political position about um, about traditional Christianity in a certain way, which is creeps me out. And you see it in somebody. A lot of evangelicals became Orthodox because of Father Seraphim Rose,
Right.
mm,
who creeps me out. I
Right.
think he was a nut, and but the thing is, I think, and I don't know where this comes from. This has nothing to do with this letter directly, but I think a lot of it has to do with a kind of psychological need for authority.
Right. Well, but it does, it actually does, Michael, because like trusting one of the ultimate messages of this letter is the trusting in the Holy Spirit. Like, and an understanding that ultimately the dogmas just represent like the understanding of the church at this time.
Hmm.
And that they are by definition like human and incomplete, and
Right.
will change in the future as they do change over time. And there are things, we have saints of the church who declared things that are now considered perfectly orthodox that were considered heresy at the time when they were written.
Exactly.
And so uh I think Tomberg's advice is to people who find themselves on the outside as to labeled heretics is to trust the church anyway and remain within it, and put your faith in the Holy Spirit and in the mysteries that are contained in the liturgies and the prayers.
Hmm.
I gotta read. I think George actually nails what you're talking about here, because we just went through this in the imagination essay. So
George MacDonald, listeners.
yes, George MacDonald.
Yeah. I'm glad you're
Okay.
in first name basis.
I am. I
Definitely.
am.
Yes.
We talk all the time.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're
All
gonna
that
have
has.
Sherry, we're gonna have to start a little betting pool. Like, at what point in this conversation will Sherry mention George McDonald?
Yeah. Well, he's talking about what, and it gets Sophianic too. So it's really interesting.
Well, I want to talk to you really quick before you can read your quote. That's
Yeah.
interesting that you say that, because this is one of the interesting things about MacDonald is that MacDonald, at the level of dogma, wouldn't touch he would not intellectually at the level of dogma touch sophiology, but if you read his fiction, he has so many sophianic images and intuitions that come through in his work anyway.
Well, he doesn't, yeah, he doesn't lay things bare oftentimes, right? He has a real respect for the veiled.
Yeah.
Like the moon features quite heavily in his fairy tales, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so all that has been said then tends to enforce the culture of the imagination, but the strongest argument of all remains behind. For if the whole power of dogmatism should rise against her, now he's talking about the imagination in Sophianic terms, the imagination will still work, and if not for good, then for evil. If not for truth, then for falsehood. If not for life, then for death. The evil alternative becoming the more likely from the unnatural treatment she has experienced from those who ought to have fostered her. The power that might have gone forth in conceiving the noblest forms of actions, in realizing the lives of the true-hearted, the self-forgetting, will go forth in building airy castles of vain ambition, of boundless riches, of unearned admiration. The imagination that might be devising how to make home blessed or to help the poor neighbor will be absorbed in the invention of the new dress, or worse, in devising the means of procuring it. For if she be not occupied with the beautiful, she will be occupied by the pleasant. That which goes not out to worship will remain at home to be sensual. That's a really key statement there. Cultivate the mere intellect as you may, it will never reduce the passions. The imagination, seeking the ideal in everything, will elevate them to their true and noble service. Seek not that your sons and your daughters should not see visions, should not dream dreams. Seek that they should see true visions, that they should dream noble dreams. Such outgoing of the imagination is one with aspiration and will do more to elevate above what is low and vile than all possible inculcations of morality. Nor can religion herself ever rise up into her own calm home, her crystal shrine, when one of her wings, one of the twain with which she flies, is thus broken or paralyzed. That's his judgment on what happens when you repress the imagination through dogmatism.
Mm-hmm.
And he gives an example of this, young woman who's has a choice between I'm trying to think of how he describes the guy, a noble gentleman type person, and then, some crazy poet guy. And if her imagination has been repressed through dogmatism, she'll choose the fool over the wise man, because and I find what's really interesting about that example is that, you would think, oh, she chooses the fool because she has an imagination, because she wants an adventure. She wants to go out, strike out, and do something crazy. But really, she's bored by the wise gentleman because she has no imagination. She can't plumb the depths of who he is and what's made him that way. You know what I'm saying? So anyway, I just thought I'd read that because I
want to try to make this salient to more salient, at least to what Tomberg's talking about here. So
yeah.
What do you like Tomberg's primary terms in this letter on the Sun? He's talking about intellect and spontaneous wisdom and intuition. Like, where do you see in MacDonald's conception of the imagination, like where do you see that working in what Tomberg is laying out here?
Well, I think for MacDonald, intuition and imagination are the same thing. They're, as far as I understand Tomberg, anyways, it seems to me.
So you think that where Tomberg is saying intuition, that's what MacDonald is calling imagination?
Yeah, it's like spiritual touch, right? The voice.
I don't think so. I think it's the spontaneous wisdom aspect. Because I still think that, and here's why, because I still think Tomberg is right in insisting that in order to have intuition, you have to have the union of spontaneous wisdom and the intellect.
Is that his version
So
of
that the
instinct?
so imagination, if it's connected with the spontaneous wisdom, and I think it is. Think about how Coleridge says that like primary imagination is essentially connected with all human perception itself, right?
Yeah.
So this makes me want to lean toward associating imagination with the aspect of the spontaneous wisdom. And also I think that's why MacDonald talks about the forms and kind of talks about imagination in almost that Sophianic aspect, right? That to me would be properly connected with the spontaneous wisdom. But to arrive at intuition, you need the intellect. True, yeah. I mean, yeah. You need the intellect to cooperate with that in order to arrive at intuition.
Okay, so for MacDonald, we're getting a little off course here, but
no, I think this is important. This is really, really important. And I think also this is why Barfield, this is what's going on with Barfield's idea of final participation too. Because in original participation, you just had the reign of the spontaneous wisdom.
Well, I think you're right.
Spontaneous wisdom reign, and then with the withdrawal participation, intellect became dominant.
Yeah.
And neither of these are a desirable state. Original participation had its
from each other.
Right.
Apart from each other.
Withdrawal participation also has obvious drawbacks. And final participation is the movement toward the union of those things, toward what Tomberg is calling the intuition.
Yeah.
And this is why imagination is this is why Barfield calls imagination a truth-bearing faculty.
Okay.
Right? Yeah, because it's part of you need the spontaneous wisdom and the intellect working together to arrive at the place of intuition, which is where you have true spiritual sight.
So MacDonald says this is almost like a direct quote from the essay. He says that imagination is the architect and intellect is the workman, which works under the architect.
Right, which is like that's the McGilchrist master and his emissary relationship. Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen that parallel too.
Right. And so and we can see how things go wrong when there's no master and there's no emissary, right? You need them working together.
Exactly.
In order to arrive at what Tomberg is calling here intuition.
Yes. So is this synthesis of the let's say the architect and the workman, is this synthesis spontaneous wisdom for Tomberg?
No, the spontaneous wisdom is only a part of the equation. The intuition, he uses the. So
is spontaneous?
He has a diagram actually.
Yeah, he does. That's where I was gonna read that.
Right, yeah, you want to?
Okay,
yeah, go for it. Go for it.
Well, except that it's on in my book. It's 542.
Okay.
And he's got his little diagram of intuition, wisdom, and intelligence turned above, and he says right afterwards, "It is not thanks to the suppression of intelligence or by becoming less intelligent that intuition is attained, but rather on the contrary, it is thanks to its intensification.
Right.
It becomes creative and is thus united to its higher transcendental aspect, after which it is united to wisdom.
Yes.
It is therefore by becoming more and more intelligent that one arrives at intuition.
Right.
Although there is another way, that of sunstroke, namely the annihilation of intelligence by the brilliance of wisdom, which is the 22nd.
And this is why he has that section of the chapter where he talks about like, hey, don't dunk on scholasticism. Scholasticism. Scholasticism wasn't generated by doubt, but it was like a work of faith to redeem the intellect, and its product was mysticism. Yeah. Like that's where both individual scholastic figures were led toward a mystical experience at the end of their scholastic journey, and the influence of scholasticism in the medieval Christian world was toward a movement toward mysticism.
It was supposed to be.
Right.
That's why.
Right.
Then it turned into a runaway bride.
Then then early modernity and manualist Thomism happened, and the withdrawal participation was in full bloom.
Well, yeah. And, Tomberg's favorite theologian, or one of them after Aquinas, is Bonaventure, right?
Right, right,
And in Bonaventure's Itinerarium, I mean, the point is it's you use intellect and then you let go of it. And that's what happened through scholasticism. A lot of guys forgot to let go of it.
and Bonaventure
Mhm.
is
They
writing
became
in
idle.
poetic form too.
Hmm.
He's not writing like the scholastics do.
Yeah, and this is I mean, intelligence is not the same thing as being an intellectual.
Yeah, that's right.
Right, right,
That's exactly
right,
right. Yeah.
right.
And George MacDonald would agree with this because the essay is called The Imagination, Its Function and Its Culture. So the part of the essay that we're in right now is how to culture it, right? And when he talks about repressing and dogmatism and so on, he's talking about an imagination that has not been cultured.
Right. And I would say that the intellect plays a role in keeping the imagination from giving way to fancy.
Yeah, which makes it not wise.
Right.
Okay. Which is what I read. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, he would agree with this.
So, uh, what's it? It's okay. So it's interesting here, and I wish I unfortunately like it's not going to show up. Like I tried to show the diagram on the book. So what's interesting here is that the symbol that in the diagram that he uses that represents the intuitive principle, that is the union of spontaneous wisdom and intelligence, is the Isis symbol.
Right.
And he uses that as a springboard to move into what he goes on to talk about for a lot of the rest of this chapter, which is
Now,
Sophia.
have you guys ever read The Golden Ass
No.
No.
or The Transformations of Lucius? It's one of my favorite books. When I would teach classical myth and literature, I always teach it. It's amazing, amazing book by Apuleius. And now he refers to it here and quotes
Yes.
from it, but he doesn't quote, I think, the most important part.
Okay.
When I approached the very gates of death and set one foot on Proserpine's threshold. Um, but here, I'm going to read you what the part he should have put in here.
Okay.
Okay.
Read and then tell us why he should have done
You'll
that
know.
part.
I won't need to tell you why.
Okay.
I will not need to tell you why. Because what the story is, what happens in the Golden Ass is Lucius, who, by goofing around with magic, is turned into an ass. And most of the book is him trying to get out of that form and all his weird adventures he has in the form of an ass.
That's already salient right there, just like
It's
that.
it's a picture of initiation into the mysteries, is what it
Right.
is.
Mhm.
And and so he's ready to kill himself because he can't take it anymore. And then this happens, and he. But if I had offended some god of unappeasable cruelty who is bent on making life impossible for me, at least grant me one sure gift, the gift of death. Right? This is his prayer. When I had finished my prayer and poured out the full bitterness of my oppressed heart, I returned to my sandy hollow, where once more sleep overcame me. I had scarcely closed my eyes before the apparition of a woman began to rise from the middle of the sea, with so lovely a face that the gods themselves would have fallen down in adoration of it. First the head, then the whole shining body gradually emerged and stood before me poised on the surface of the waves. Yes, I will try to describe this transcendent vision, for though human speech is poor and limited, the goddess herself will perhaps inspire me with poetic imagery sufficient to convey some slight inkling of what I saw. Her long, thick hair fell in tapering ringlets on her lovely neck, and was crowned with an intricate chaplet in which was woven every kind of flower. Just above her brow shone a round disk, like a mirror, or like the bright face of the moon, which told me who she was. Vipers rising from the left hand and right hand partings of her hair supported this disk, with ears of corn bristling beside them. Her many-colored robe was of finest linen. Part was glistening white, part crocus yellow, part glowing red, and along the entire hem a woven border of flowers and fruit clung swaying in the breeze. But what caught and held my eye more than anything else was the deep black luster of her mantle. She wore it slung across her body from the right hip to the left shoulder, where it was caught in a knot resembling the boss of a shield. But part of it hung in innumerable folds, the tasseled fringe quivering. It was embroidered with glittering stars in the hem and everywhere else, and in the middle beamed a full and fiery moon. In her right hand she held a bronze rattle of the sort used to frighten away the god of the Sirocco. Its narrow rim was curved like a sword belt, and three little rods, which sang shrilly when she took the handle, passed horizontally through it. A boat-shaped gold dish hung from her right hand, and along the upper surface of the handle writhed an asp, with puffed throat and head raised ready to strike. On her divine feet were slippers of palm leaves, the emblem of victory. All the perfumes of Arabia floated into my nostrils as the goddess deigned to answer me. You see me here, Lucius, in answer to your prayer. I am nature, the universal mother, mistress of all the elements, primordial child of time, sovereign of all things spiritual, queen of the dead, queen of also the immortals, the single manifestation of all gods and goddesses that are. My nod governs the shining heights of heaven, the wholesome sea breezes, the lamentable silences of the world below. Though I am worshipped in many aspects, known by countless names, propitiated with all manner of different rites, yet the whole round earth venerates me. The primeval Phrygians call me Pessineutica, mother of the gods, and the Athenians, sprung from their own soil, call me Procropian Artemis. For the island of Cyprus, I am Paphian Aphrodite. For the archers of Crete, I am Dictina. For the trilingual Sicilians, Stygian Proserpine. And for the Eleusinians, their ancient mother of the corn. Some know me as Juno, some as Bellona of the battles, others as Hecate, others again as Ranubia, but both races of Ethiopians, whose lands the morning sun first shines upon, and the Egyptians who excel in ancient learning and worship me, with ceremonies proper to my godhead, call me by my true name, Queen Isis. I have come in pity of your plight. I have come to favor and aid you. Weep no more, lament no longer. The hour of deliverance, shone over by my watchful light, is at hand. And she goes on and tells him what he's got to do next.
Wow, what a description.
I mean, wow, right?
Yeah.
And that to me, that's in a way,
That's amazing
that's some
poetry,
ancient
first of all.
sociology right there, right?
That's really like next level poetry too, though.
It
I mean,
is.
that's just
Yeah, of course, it's
so
translated by
good.
Robert Graves, one of the great
Oh,
poets of the 20th
okay.
century, right?
Yeah, that's a
Um,
great.
but and this is why do you think he got into what do you think the White Goddess is really about, right?
Right.
Um, but so there's this tremendous. So I think with the allusion to Apuleius that Tomberg drops here with a quote that's not quite right there, that's kind of what's undergirding this entire letter, which is in a way,
The woman.
it's Sophia appearing. Just think in Jungian terms. So she's in the water,
Yeah.
and she comes out of the water. She comes from the unconscious to the conscious. This is exactly what's going on in this letter, where Tomberg is bringing Sophia from the kind of subtext that's in the earlier letters, and the kind of this talk about the submerged reality, right? And she's coming out of the water to full consciousness.
Yeah.
And that's I think, and then later he gets when he drops. This is when the heretic alarms go off for a lot of tradies and super conservatives. Is when he drops the mother, the daughter, and the holy soul. Game over.
Yeah.
And yeah. And this is why I think he's appealing to intuition here, because he's not like, it's like, okay, let's set dogma aside for a second.
Okay. And what is intuition, right?
And I think this is actually connected. This is actually, believe it or not, I think this is actually, the Chardin
I just want Michael to answer that
drops.
question. What is intuition?
Isn't intuition? I don't know if I have the perfect definition, but when we have intuitions, isn't it that we know something is true and we don't know how it's true, but we know it's true?
Yes.
Well, okay.
As children, too,
I think,
right? As a child, you hear about the Holy Trinity and you go, well, where's the woman? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's something missing. I know it's here. What is it? You know,
Emil Bach, and I'm pretty sure he gets this from Steiner. He describes intuition as a sense of spiritual touch. And if you look at the way we talk about our intuitions, that it really kind of backs up that idea of it, because when we describe our intuitions, we say, "I just had a feeling."
mm-hmm.
That's how, like, that's the kind of
Well,
language we use about it.
Here's something interesting. Okay, so Job, in the book of Job, Job is called integer by God, right? It's his integrity that makes him righteous. But it's also, his integrity is also connected to intuition, because he gets glimpses throughout the book of life after death, God actually loving the wicked, which in his worldview previously was inconceivable, right? And of course, all those intuitions are against the dogma of the day, right? So his friends, the more glimpses that Job gets, the more intuitions that he gets, the more incensed they become against him, right? And they start saying things to him like this is the topper. They say, "Oh, we thought you were righteous. You looked righteous, but you were actually deceiving us," right? Because therefore, the way that they understood righteousness was that it was visible through prosperity,
which is a hermeneutic of suspicion, by the way.
Right. And so what I'm trying to connect here is Job's integrity, intuition, and then the virgin. Okay, because that integrity, in my opinion, is something virginal. It's something that can't be what's the word? Can't be corrupted.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That's interesting. It's important.
Yeah, I think so.
I was actually thinking about Job when Michael was talking to us about the golden ass and sharing the bit of the police's poetry, because notice the state that Lucius is in, right? Where he's in a place where like misfortune has befallen him and he's wanting to die. And I immediately was thinking about Job. When he brought that up, it's like, and I was kind of
there's a lot of talk about wild donkeys in the book of Job too, which is interesting.
and he's at the threshold of sleep when it happens.
Yeah.
There's a Chardin quote early in the chapter where
which is forgetting, according to Tomberg. Sleep is forgetting.
Right.
Well, he says that in this chapter, he says that resurrection is the divine equivalent of memory.
I have to say this because I read it just this morning, but he also says there is no action without forgetting. And that's from the next chapter. Right. But that's kind of interesting, right? So like Michael's saying that he has this vision at the threshold of sleep, which is the older brother of forgetting, right? And Tomberg says that there is no action without forgetting, which kind of corresponds to the whole samurai example of, learning your skills and your sword and all that stuff. And then when you go to the battlefield, you have to forget it.
Exactly.
Right. Otherwise you'll die.
Which is connected to the first arcanum, which is concentration without effort.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So okay. Let's see if I can complete this thought, because now I have like a whole bunch of other thoughts running through my head.
I bet.
So and I think I'm gonna lose at least one of them, but I do want to get back to the original point that I was trying to make. And so there's a Chardin quote early in the chapter, and there's this line in the quote about personality making person, like as essentially. Do you remember that?
Yep.
Or do I? Okay. All right.
I got it.
I can just read it because it's also
maybe read it to
it's
refresh
also
my
at the
memory.
beginning. It's also I'll read it. It's also right at the beginning of the chapter too. So
531, girl.
Okay.
All right, I'll read it from there. Yeah. Okay. Actually, you want to read it, Shari? You
sure.
can read it. Just read the Chardin quote, and then I'll talk about what I was thinking about it.
Under the combined influence of men's thoughts and aspirations, the universe around us is seen to be knit together and convulsed by a vast movement of convergence, not only theoretically, but experientially. Our modern cosmogony, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Our modern cosmogony is taking the form of a cosmogenesis, at the term of which we can distinguish a supreme focus of personalizing personality.
Personalizing personality. That's the, yeah. Supreme focus of personalizing personality. And so think here of what Vervaeke says about agape, right? So that personalizing personality at the center of this convergence is the divine.
Right.
And we have had a tendency to forget. Okay, he relates that to parental love, right? We've had a tendency, particularly in Western Christianity, to focus exclusively on the paternal. But parental love is the combination of both the paternal and the maternal.
Right.
And
but don't you think, though, Nate, that the maternal is essentially and maybe even practically veiled?
Yes. I think Tomberg, that's why Tomberg waits until he's talking about a chapter that is dedicated primarily intuition to bring this up. Right. And how does he, and the appeals that he makes are not like, they're not discursive reasoning. He appeals to symbols and to intuitions. Like he makes a direct appeal to intuition and to symbols. And symbols kind of point the intellect toward intuition. That's kind of like what they do, right? Because you can kind of like, you can analyze symbols with the intellect, but they're always pointing to more than they contain.
Well, the
intellect can never take them in all the way, so it ends up. So you look at the symbol with the intellect, but it brings the intuition into play because your intellect cannot ever.
No, because they're a synthesis.
Right, exactly. The symbol itself is a synthesis. So the symbols are always move you toward intuition because they are by nature a synthesis. And this is what, and that's what, and I think this personalizing, force that's at the center of everything has a maternal and a paternal aspect. It's just necessarily the case. Like God necessarily is the image of all paternity and maternity. Like there's no escaping that. We all know it. I don't have to give you a discursive argument to prove that. You know it.
Well, he made the first human being as both masculine and feminine, right? So, but it's interesting because I was just thinking about in the beginning of Phantastes, when Enodos is going through his father's secretary, he finds a hidden drawer and he opens it up and this little tiny fairy woman steps out, right? And because she's tiny, he doesn't take her seriously. So she makes herself full size. And as soon as she makes herself full size, he wants to kiss her. And she says, "Don't touch me. I could be your grandmother." Right? Mm-hmm. And then he says, "Well, you're not my grandmother." And then she says, "You know everything about your grandfathers, but you know nothing about your grandmothers." And that's really, to me, that's a statement of the divine feminine being veiled and hidden, right? Yeah.
Right. And hiding, but where is it hiding? So I mean, Tomberg, I think, is right in pointing to where it's hiding. It's hiding. He points toward things like the novena and the rosary and the liturgy. And
I'm wondering, this is just a random question, Nate, but maybe you know the answer to this. But I know that in Judaism, genealogy is through the mother, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Which is unusual, I think. I wonder if that's pointing at the hiddenness of the feminine in any way.
The Picts had matrilineal succession too. It's
Okay.
not unprecedented, but
when they do usually matrilineal succession is because you might not know who the father
Right.
The father is.
but you
Doubt
know
it.
who the mother is. Yeah,
But for me, I
exactly.
mean, Judaism would be spiritual, I think, if it, and not just utilitarian, right?
Well, he does. I mean, do we want to? There is a section here where he points toward. So he uses the hexagram as, or the seal of Solomon, as the symbol of the luminous Trinity. Do we want to talk about that?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So
What page, Nate?
it is.
328.
Oh, he's got it already. Yeah,
528?
548.
548. 548. So I don't know.
It
This
starts
might be
up on
this might be large enough to get on.
Sure.
So there's probably can't see what it actually says, but essentially, I mean, it's the seal of Solomon, and so we have there you go. Oh yeah, that's good. That I can actually see that. Good job there, Michael.
Thank you.
All right.
I honed my
So,
skills.
so you have the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, and then you have the Mother, Daughter, and Holy Soul.
Mm.
And essentially, he's telling you that that this luminous Trinity represents like the Holy Trinity and Sophia together.
Right.
He talks about the Zohar too there.
Yes, he does. Yes, he does.
Should I read it?
Sure.
The Zohar puts forth the idea of the luminous Holy Trinity. It teaches that the great name of God, YHVH, reveals the Father, Y, the Supreme Mother, H, the Son, V, and the Daughter, the second He of the divine name, YHVH. Such is the eternal name, YHVH, but in the history of the created world, there are also revealed the Shekinah, identified with the community of Israel, the true Rachel weeping for her children, who weeps in exile, and who is the beautiful virgin who has no eyes. There's references to the Zohar, and the Messiah King who descends and reascends through all the heavens in order to exercise with all the prophets who are to be found the universal function of salvation. And the Ruach HaKodesh, the holy breath or Holy Spirit, of which Sadia speaks, through the intermediary of which the 32 ways of wisdom are incorporated in the air that one breathes. The holy breath by the means of which God is revealed to the prophets at the foundation of the secret of creation, and which is called the breath of the living God. The Messiah is the seventh term or principle of the hexagram, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, Mother, Daughter, Holy Soul, equals Shekinah, or the community of Israel. He is the agent of all, the active summary of the bipolar Trinity, or as we have called it, the luminous Holy Trinity. Wow.
And then he goes on to give like other like mythological parallels for this kind of thinking too.
Yes.
You Catholics worship Mary.
And he says, yeah, and you know what?
I know he's
he doesn't say no, we just venerate her. He says, yep.
I know.
Yeah, I know.
Game on.
I know. I feel a little afraid. People that might be watching this.
The other you caught. Did you catch John Milbank and our interview with him when he would talk about Sophia, and he said, "I just want to let you know, all you evangelicals in Middle America, it's in the Bible."
It's in the Bible.
Yeah, I remember that.
It's in the Bible.
So we probably need a disclaimer right here. But it's true. I mean, gosh, this is, this is what I've had to rethink about my understanding of what the church is, and and what's been handed down to us, and which is what I told those people in Cambridge last September. Is that what we have is we have an inheritance of categories.
Yes.
Somebody brings in something that doesn't fit the category, we don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And
And
so
there's
we
no
had a set of
synthesis.
categories. Where do you put Sophia in these well, there's not an available spot. Okay.
Yeah.
So either you need new categories or you need to admit that that theology was not completely thought out at the time of the fathers. Okay. There's no other way to think about it.
Yeah. Right.
You know,
Well, that's like
which is why it's heretical.
Which,
because we haven't
which
got
is
there.
interesting.
I'm
We
cool
haven't-
with that.
But but you know what? There was a time when there was a time when the Trinity was heretical too.
Well, this is what I love about Origin.
It was not. I mean, the idea that it was always the Orthodox position is just not borne out by the historical record.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think Origin might have been the Tomberg of his time, don't you think? I mean, he was playing around with all kinds of ideas, and then he would actually say, and I read it, things like, I could have this wrong. If anybody has any better ideas, please let me know. I'm just feeling my way around in the dark here. But the wonderful thing about him was that he wasn't afraid to say something that might.
Right. He
Right?
wasn't, and
Rock
you
the
have
boat.
to have. Okay, so in order to do,
Well,
I keep saying this, and I'm going to say it again. You can't do any theology that's worthwhile unless you are not afraid.
Yeah.
You have to be willing to go wherever the Spirit leads you without fear. And you cannot. This is actually related to a portion of this chapter where he talks about like when you're following the star, don't consult with Herod and the scribes.
yeah, good advice.
Yeah.
Because Herod and the scribes are an anti-revelatory force, and I would say that that he doesn't say this explicitly, but you can make a direct line between the spirit of Herod and the scribes and the spirit of dogmatism.
Yeah, I was going to say that. I was
Good.
just thinking that.
I like that.
Yeah. 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 And not only that, but the Magi were not from the nation of Israel. They weren't Christians. Right.
Right. It's also, and this is going to make a lot of people
came from a totally different tradition.
This is going to make a lot of people mad too.
Right?
It also represents the conservative impulse operating on its own.
Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah.
we don't want either the conservative or progressive impulse operating on its own, unchecked. Like they're both. You get Herod if you have the conservative impulse operating on its own.
Yeah. And I do, as an aside, I love watching Christians squirm when you bring up that the Magi were astrologers. No,
Yeah.
they were scientists. Ugh.
No, they weren't.
No, they
There
weren't.
there was no such thing as astronomy in the classical era. All astronomy was astrology.
And it's too funny. And even some Bibles, I've written about this before, so, different Bible commentaries, they try to explain that away. Yeah, they were wise men.
Yeah.
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 What were they wise
Sages
about? They were wise
initiated.
about the paths of the stars.
They were sages initiated into the Zoroastrian mysteries.
Yeah.
That should be the translation.
Right, and they were looking, and I mean,
Wait, yeah, help me out. You're telling me astrology doesn't work, yet astrologers knew that Christ was born. Can you explain it? Unpack that for me, will you please? I wonder how Vanderklay is with that.
well, but that's the thing. Well, but that's one of the things that this is one of the things that Tomberg talks about here too, is how like this, the belief that we can Christianize all things, essentially. This is what he says is good about scholasticism, is that it had the belief that it could take the wisdom of the pagans, and it could Christianize it.
Well, this is why I love what St. Paul says on Mars Hill, right? Like he doesn't condemn the gods. He doesn't say that they're false gods. He says, I know their name. I know his name, this unknown God. I know his name.
Mhm.
Okay.
Right.
And so people are, anybody with any kind of integrity, again, let's go with the Job version of integrity, which is righteousness. it's virginal, right?
Mhm.
They're gonna say, oh, okay, I love this. What's his name?
Mhm.
Right? I want to know. And I mean, obviously, whatever the three kings or the magi or however you want to describe them, whatever they saw compelled them to travel a great distance with expensive gifts, because this character was, important
So
for
do you
the
remember,
world.
did you see Paul's video recently where he was looking at that segment of the Exodus seminar where there was this sudden conflict that arose between the rigid monotheists and Pajot and a couple of the other people that had had a who believed that the gods are that the god that the pagan gods were actually gods, and that God is saying that he is the highest God and the greatest God, and not that he's the only God.
Mhm.
Um,
God
and
standeth in the congregation of the mighty; he judgeth amongst the gods. Right.
right, yeah,
Yes.
exactly. Psalm 80, yeah, Psalm 82,
Mm-hmm.
Psalm 82, yeah, right.
There it is.
So, uh, it's so there was this conflict, and it's and without it, I mean, you could all you have to do is you could look at it and see it's like, oh, the people who were on the side of rigid monotheism, 100% of them completely they're all 100% rationalists. Like,
Yeah.
rigid monotheism is the product of rationalism. It is
Yeah.
not the product of faith.
Right.
It just
It's not
is.
mystical at all.
There's no it's you've sucked all the life out of the faith when you end up with a rigid
I mean,
monotheism.
how do you get the flood without other gods? How do you get the Nephilim? How do you get all that stuff, right?
You have all kinds of problems, all kinds of things. And you know where it leads? So it's just like, they're just honestly the people that remain like within the boundary, the rationalists who remain within the boundaries of Christian orthodoxy are just less good at following their own method. Because if you follow your own method, it leads to atheism.
Well, they're intellectually dishonest, is what it is.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Because I mean, so many of them. Like this is, I've taken a lot of heat from these people.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
who who whose mysticism only exists for about 30 seconds on Sunday morning, and and for the rest of the time they're scientific materialists, right?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
You know, um, and I don't see how that's tenable, and that's why it's refreshing for me to hear people like Milbank or David Hart
Right.
who who show that an enchanted worldview is not regressive but is actually rational.
But are both men of intellect at the same
Absolutely.
time, right?
They're
So it's
not,
like,
they're no dummies, right?
Like
both
super
of
intellect.
those are two very good examples of exactly what Tomberg is talking about in this chapter. You're talking about men who have not just eliminated intellect or or spontaneous wisdom, but like brought them together into intuition by allowing intellect to operating in synthesis with that spontaneous wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
That's true. And you see, I mean, that's also, I should add, I mean, Addison Hart, that he's all over that.
Yeah.
Yes.
I actually,
You
honestly,
thought Addie?
I prefer listening to Addison over David Bentley Hart, because there. I'm just going to say this. There seems to be a deeper wisdom.
You should read, honestly, Shari, read Roland and Moonlight. Read Roland and Moonlight.
I have it, and I
don't
still
read it. You should read it. Don't like. I would actually like. That's the David Bentley Hart book that you need to read in order to see who David really is.
Yeah.
Because like David, like he's very witty, and he will unleash his wit against his intellectual opponents.
And he does in that book as well, right?
Yeah, he does. But but you also see another side of him as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think, and he's all basically just read his fiction. Like And
Yeah.
Rolling in Moonlight is his book that's not necessarily fiction, but kind of that reads like his fiction. So I think it's his best book. That's the
Yeah.
one I would recommend. I think you'll see another side of him there.
Yeah.
But there he has deep wisdom. He really does. He really does. But he's like,
I don't doubt that. I'm just saying
he doesn't
for me
he doesn't
personally-
he's not slow to draw his saber of wit against his intellectual
Yeah,
opponents.
He still likes to be an asshole at times, right?
Right.
He just does.
Right.
it's right.
He
Right.
does.
Yeah.
And he admits it in that book too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. He's very
Yeah.
yes.
Well, there
Yeah.
is a utility in that sometimes too, actually.
I mean, yeah.
It's a bit of a shock and awe campaign, right?
Yeah, sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Although that game is a dangerous game to play, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And I wish he wouldn't do some of the things he says sometimes too. But
Well, it's like he
on
can't.
the whole,
resist,
I
right?
greatly appreciate it.
It's like that. You ever see Who Framed Roger Rabbit?
Yes,
How
years
they get him
ago.
to come out. And Roger can't resist saying 2 bits. Right?
Yeah.
That's like David Hart. He has certain things that you just go.
Yeah, and I think that right.
Neo
So this is,
scholasticism.
right. Yeah, this is exactly, and it's like largely that's a temperament thing. Like I don't even think
I
that's
love it
something
about
that
him. I
he's
mean,
right, exactly. It's both.
It's entertaining as hell.
It is very
It is.
entertaining.
It is. Yeah.
It is very entertaining.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's like, I mean, I roll at some of the things he says, and I think he goes a little over the top, like particularly with some of his
Which
political
is
commentary.
just part of his charm, right?
But yeah, exactly. It's just like we got to allow each other to be who
There's
we
a
are.
betting pool. In what paragraph will David lose his shit?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there was a part, actually, I edited Rolling in the Moonlight.
Oh, really?
And he's got this rant about Donald Trump in there,
Uh-huh.
which we kept trying to tell him, tone it down or take it out. He's like, I'm not taking it out. He did tone it down eventually.
It
But,
totally doesn't even belong in that book.
No, it doesn't.
He
That's why I
shouldn't.
told
He
him, I
should
said,
have.
I don't want to date the book, right?
I was gonna say
Yeah,
totally
yeah.
dated
Years
it
to read
then.
this. What is he
Yeah,
talking
yeah. It definitely was an ill-advised thing to include in that particular book, especially.
Yeah,
Which is basically it's a mystical work.
absolutely.
So
And I love the part where Roland becomes the Buddha and gives the Lotus Sutra.
Yeah, you got to read this book, Shari.
So
Yeah.
good.
I gotta do it.
Yeah.
I mean, editing that book, I laughed out loud quite a few times.
Yeah, David is David's really funny.
He
He's
is
very
really
funny. He's
Oh
very
yeah,
funny.
that's why he
Good.
can be so cutting.
Yeah, right.
Because he gets right to the heart of things, right? Yeah. He sees through the sham.
Yeah.
Actually, I laughed out loud at Michael's recent Substack.
Oh,
Which one?
The spiritual assholes.
Yeah.
Just the title.
I laughed too.
I think I might
laughed out
have.
loud a couple times at that one myself.
I might have missed that one.
Oh, it's a good one.
Can you give me can you give me the TLDR on that?
Just we've met them all. I mean, they're the world's populated spiritual assholes.
Yeah.
Right. Well, it was triggered by the thing that happened with the Dalai Lama.
Oh, right. No, I think I did. Oh, I did read that. I just forgot that was what you called it. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. I did read that one. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm like, wow, should I use this as a title?
It was perfect. It was perfect, Michael.
Yeah,
loved
it's like that actually brings us to one of the people that has been a target of a lot of David Bentley Hart's ire, and that is Shuan, right? Shuan fits into that same sort of like category.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Well, they're all
setting himself up as the great spiritual master while being a creepy pedophile.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, it's a disease.
Yeah. It's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Well, actually, Tomberg actually talks about that early on in the
Spiritual
chapter
megalomania,
because
right?
he talks about in terms of like why it is that on the image of the card, which we haven't actually talked about the image on the card this time.
Mm-hmm.
He says that's the reason, the reason that it's 2 children is because that children don't get caught up in this this need to like play the pontiff to impersonate the pontiff,
Mm-hmm.
or to be the one who delights in the attention of their master or guru.
Right.
So it's like you have to be in that mindset in order to get to this place that he's talking about.
Which is precisely why I think of Thomas Traherne as a sociologist, because all of his
Michael, isn't every truly great poet a sociologist in like the full, like, whether they're I'm not saying that they explicitly like.
Did you put Traherne and Bukowski?
We'll talk about.
But Traherne in particular, I mean, Traherne was obviously influenced by Burma.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's where, when he talks about, and he's influenced by that statement in the gospel, you're not into the kingdom until you become a child again.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
The reason I say that is because to me, what a truly great poet does is illuminate what is divine in the creation, which is what sociology is. Like that's what a truly great poet is showing you. It's like the creation is also divine.
Right.
And they're showing that to you. So a truly great poet is functionally let's say poets are practical sociologists, regardless of whether they would align themselves with sociology from a intellectual standpoint.
Could you say also that that the mundane is sacred and the sacred is mundane, and that's what they're showing you?
What's mundane?
Well, here's the thing. Are you guys familiar with the French philosopher Jean Val?
No.
He's got this great saying, and I used it in one of my books. What poetry does, or mysticism does, is makes the very near seem mysterious, and the mysterious seem very near here.
Yeah, like this is we talked about this yesterday in when we did the imagination thing. This is on earth as it is in heaven, right? Like, yeah.
Well, and that image of the Seal of Solomon, where he shows like the luminous Holy Trinity, that it would also be the symbol of the union of heaven and earth. And
right. I mean, this is why Wendell Berry is so, he's making the everyday sacred, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's taking, he's making what's in on earth as in heaven.
which is uniting heaven and earth.
Right. Exactly.
And it's interesting that he shows the Seal of Solomon, right? And then he says, but then he mentions in that text that you read, he talks about the fact that the Messiah is the seventh principle.
Mm-hmm.
So the Messiah is the one who brings that symbol to its realization.
Is that the Sabbath too? Is there
which is Thomas Bromley, the sociologist from the 17th century England, the Philadelphian. His greatest book, and it might be his only book, is called The Way to the Sabbath of Rest.
Mm.
Yeah.
The earliest sociological treatises. It's beautiful.
Well, and of course, you just brought up Wendell Berry, and Wendell Berry has this whole cycle of like Sabbath poems.
So, yeah.
And that's also, well, yes. I mean, for the answer to your question from Tomberg's point of view is yes, because Tomberg actually says that that's the entire, like, that overcoming of the closed world of the serpent.
Yeah.
Is the opening of the world to Sabbath.
And the Messianic age is
the age of perpetual Sabbath.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The seventh principle.
Now,
seventh
to return
day.
to the text.
Yes.
So one thing,
Mr. Martin,
I can see my my gloss here where I wrote "pow" in the margin.
Oh, cool.
Ow. Okay.
On page 550.
Okay.
When he says, "One should honor the Father who is in heaven and the celestial Mother." This is why practicing believers of the traditional church, that is, the Roman Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church, caring little for the difference, get that again, caring little for the difference stated in dogmatic theology between celestial Father and Mother, love and honor, in their practice of prayer, the celestial Mother no less than the Father who is in heaven.
Mm-hmm.
Dogmatic theologians may well put believers on their guard against exaggeration in the domain of Mariology, and Protestant critics may well advance criticism of the cult of the Virgin Mary as idolatry. But practicing believers of the traditional church continue and will always continue to honor and love their celestial mother as the eternal mother of all that lives and breathes.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's important. And I think this is what he's talking about, and this is the intuition of folk religion,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, throughout the world, the
Yeah.
intuition of folk religion, this is what it points to always.
Yes, it does.
And
Yeah.
and it's not that it points to the mother exclusively. It points to the mother and the father,
Mother and the father.
right?
Well,
That's
don't you?
right. This is like, this is, I mean, it's, go ahead, Sherry. I didn't.
Well, I'm just thinking about how foolish it would be not to. I mean,
But the history of the church is foolishness in that
yeah.
in precisely that way, which is why Father Alexis Mesberger, actually bishop, I think, by archbishop at one point in the Orthodox Church, why he wrote in 1930 something that when we read in Genesis, "Let us make man in our image," he's talking to Sophia,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So, and talk about getting it wrong from the beginning, right? Getting it wrong from the beginning. I mean, that was pushing Sophia and the feminine underwater right there
Hmm.
in the misinterpretation of that.
Meanwhile, we're walking around
I know.
as mothers and fathers with children.
Right.
Like we're actually, that's the world, like it's hidden in plain sight in my
But now we're on. I'm gonna bust out a little apocalypse on y'all. Now we're at in a
Mhm.
way the final battle,
Yes.
because it's a battle over the mother and the
Mhm.
feminine in the real world in real time. Right
Yeah.
And
now.
children and against children.
Yes.
Right, because like it's really weird because it's like I mean, to put it in Barfieldian terms, it's like the withdrawal of participation is like it's simultaneously, it clearly seems to be ending. Like there's more and more of a growing sense of the reality of participation, I would say, in our age, or at least a longing for it, a longing for participation, but mostly in a kind of misdirected desire to return to original participation.
Mm-hmm.
So, but at the same time, there's this like last ditch effort to push everything in the direction of what Steiner would call the harmonic at the same time.
That's where we're going.
It's
Yep.
like so there's like this last
We
stand
are
of the
here, right?
and the harmonic is the ultimate culmination or goal of the withdrawal participation. This is just like the the elimination
Absolutely.
of the feminine element altogether.
Well, it's cold, it's dry, it's steely, right? Those are the descriptions
Right.
of the harmonic.
Well, that's why I
there's-
have the last chapter in my book Transfiguration is Sophia in Ahriman. That's exactly what I'm talking about,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
This is where we are.
Yeah.
This is where we are. And I saw it coming, but I didn't see it coming that quickly.
No, I didn't either. And it's exponential. Yeah. As my husband was saying, like when the spiral starts, it's way out here, right? But as you get closer to
Well, in a way, Sherry, this is like I tried when in the conversation we had with Paul, where I talked about artificial intelligence being all intellect without nous. But another way of saying that is it's like it's all intellect with no wisdom, and it also seems to be like the ultimate expression of masculinity with no element of the feminine at all.
Mm-hmm.
The UN just put out a paper. I can't remember the name of it, but I can send you a link, Nate, if you're interested. And Article 16 of that paper eliminates the age of consent for children. Like there's no, it's glaringly missing from what they recommend. And the other thing that's missing from what their recommendations is that we need to leave pedophiles alone, right? That they have a right to be, because everything else does, and everything else is included in Article 16.
Well,
And minors should be able to decide for themselves, are their words.
this is connected
Okay.
to the elimination of the feminine too, because what is it that protects the children? It's the maternal instinct. So if your culture is driving out the feminine and the maternal entirely,
Right.
then of course there's nothing to protect the children.
Mhm.
And you see that
True.
those horrible images of Pete Buttigieg with his nursing armor on. You ever see that?
No.
It's like a thing he put on so he could pretend to nurse his baby. I think it was
Oh.
Pete Buttigieg when he and his partner had a couple of kids or something somehow, whether they adopted. I can't remember what the circumstances were, but there was a picture of him with this chest feeding apparatus on, and I was at the shoot me now stage.
Yeah.
Right there.
You know, that's Michael, that's interesting, because like there's a way in which like for all of us, like the healthy integration of both our masculine and feminine aspects is important for all of us. But there's a difference between that and this sort of like masculine appropriation of the feminine.
The patriarchy always wins, right?
Oh, yeah.
So what do you think is the like what is, I can't really articulate exactly, I can intuit the difference, right? But I don't know that I can articulate it. So it's like one of those things that's like I can see the difference and I can sense the difference like intuitively, but I have a hard time articulating exactly what the difference is between like, you know, a man who is like, you know, genuinely seeking a like a balance point of the energies within himself versus one who is appropriating the feminine.
Yeah, you can't do it by
for power. I think it's because it's done for power. Like ultimately, it's done for power.
Yes.
I think that's the difference.
Well, that's how it's working out, because that's what our culture understands as power, right? Everything is based on, and it used to be.
So it's a masculine attempt to grab the power of the feminine for itself.
Well, because if you think about it, like third and fourth wave feminism was all about pricks and power, right?
Right.
And which I never understood. I mean, it was like because it was kind of a blatant admission that the apex of human civilization was what dudes do, right? Especially corporate executives, right? Is that the goal?
Well,
then,
yeah,
but lately, it's been proved, because we can see very clearly that the unintended end game, or actually the end game, that unconscious end game of that kind of feminism, ended up being patriarchy.
Yeah, well, because if you focus on the thing with bitterness and resentment, you actually become it.
That's what Blake says, right? They became.
Yeah.
Our culture is obsessed.
Right. You walk right into it.
A culture has twin obsessions: it's power and consumption. Mm-hmm. And we want the power so that we can increase our ability to consume. And I would say that like both of those drives seem to have a masculine aspect to them. So what are the feminine drives and the feminine aspects that we're suppressing as we follow those off a cliff?
Well, you know what? I don't know if you guys caught these, but I included one in one of my Substacks. But there have been these occasional videos coming up, whether it's on TikTok or whatever, of young women, like in their 20s, making a case for a real feminism that embraces the feminine. Which was really refreshing for me to hear about that. And I've been talking to students at the college about it, girls in particular, right? So what do you guys think about this? And Mary Harrington is on the warpath about this too, right?
Isn't Camille Paglia doing the same thing, or hasn't she always been?
She has been forever.
Yeah.
She's been calling feminists on their bullshit for a long time.
Yeah.
She calls them, how did feminism become this group of clingy?
Yeah. Well, Camille Paglia has also played. Camille Paglia also played a role in that, like giving too much credence to the masculine aspect too, though, because Camille Paglia used to say things like, "If women had been in charge, we would still be living in grass huts." I mean, that's a Camille Paglia quote. So,
I think she has a really good point that I've thought about a long time, because there's a lack of older women. Women are social and they need to learn from each other. And there's a lack of wisdom in female communities because we're atomized individuals, right? We don't live in extended families anymore. Camille gives the example of, in grandmother's day, all the women went down to the fountain in the town and washed clothes together and sang and exchanged gossip and shared, burdens and whatever, right? And I agree with her. Women need that. I see a lot of
Absolutely.
young mothers just absolutely traumatized because they take this little baby home and they're all alone and they've got nobody to say, that's normal, that's okay, we
Right.
can deal with it like this, right? They fall into despair. They may make some wrong decisions because science says you don't need to breastfeed, or you don't need to, so yeah,
So,
it's so
Well,
missing in our
Sherry,
culture.
what we're especially missing, it seems to me, is we're missing like we're missing the elder woman.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm talking
we're
about.
missing the crone aspect like more than
well,
anything, because our culture doesn't value that at
doesn't
all.
value older men either, right?
Because
No older men either. Yeah.
like women are like only like women are culturally trained to tie up their entire value with their sexual desirability.
But the other thing is, is that we've been poisoned. I mean, my generation and probably a little earlier, with this false notion that men and women are like just they're things on an assembly line. You see this going on right now, right?
Yeah.
They're neutral in being, and everything else is just kind of cosmetics, but which is not true. And here's a kind of funny story. So when I was a musician in my 20s, we were playing this club, and in our dressing room there was this ladder that just happened to be in there, and it went up, and I said, oh, I'm goofing around. And so I climbed the ladder, and the ladder happened to look over into the women's restroom.
Oh
And
my
I
God.
looked over the door, and I didn't see into the stalls or anything. I just saw by where all the sinks were, and I was blown away because all the girls were like, "Oh, that looks so good on you. That's oh, yeah, where are you from?" And I'm like, I come down the ladder, and go, guys, they're not like us, because you would never see that happen in a men's restroom.
There's no
That's a nice
conversation
shirt.
at
Where'd you get
all.
that, Nate? Don't you look into my shirt, right?
Yeah, no.
Very different thing.
Like
And,
you
but
you don't
we're
even
not alike.
you don't make eye contact, let alone have a
What you looking at?
conversation in a men's room.
What you looking at, man? Right? But girls were like totally different thing. I was like, wow, it's just like I just looked into a different world.
And they need to do that in order to discover the proper version of themselves. It's yeah, it's really I don't know what to do about it, honestly. I don't know how to solve it.
Well,
And this is part of the reason why I don't like the conversation about trads and progressives, because if you happen to sound traddy, you get dismissed. Or on the other side of the equation, if you happen to sound progressive, you get dismissed, right?
Right.
Can't we be both?
No, this is yes, sure, yes. This actually ties back to something that Tomberg talks about like earlier in the book, when he's talking about this idea of continuity of tradition. I notice about the way that he's talking, like where he's trusting the spirit to elucidate dogmas of the future as regards to what he's talking about sophiology too here, right? So like Tomberg is perfectly aware that tradition evolves and changes over time. And he talks about this idea of this continuity of tradition. And continuity of tradition happens when you have communication between that traditional conservative element that finds itself like attracted to what's come before, and it feels solid to it, and the progressive impulse, which is like, hey, we still need to be looking toward our final cause. the telos in the future that is out in the future that is drawing toward us. And these things need to be in communication in order for the tradition to develop in the way that it ought to.
Well, see, this is the, to me, this is the, tradition is the cumulative wisdom of our elders. That's what it is. And we need both. We need the elders, and we need the warriors. We need the young.
Happens, those things are turned into idols, right?
Yeah.
The tradition becomes an idol, and you can't deviate from the tradition.
Correct, because the conditions in history change. So yes, we don't want to ignore this received wisdom of the past, because it does have things that are valuable to us, but the conditions of the past are different from the conditions of the present. So a living tradition has to be able to adapt itself to new conditions, and that is it can't either gravitate in one direction, like only what has come before, we shall never deviate from what has come before, or only what's new. It can't go in either extreme. It has to bring those things into conversation in order to create a healthy tradition in the present.
Right, and that's what
continuity of tradition.
Right, I mean, I've been trying to, and that's why I think a phenomenological approach is the most sane, because you attend to the things as they are rather than what's received. This received tradition or received opinion or whatever it happens to be, you get, it's a trap, it's a cage.
Well, I see this modeled really well in First Nations communities, because their tradition isn't in a book. Right. It's not recorded for all time. It's a living tradition of living elders. And those elders reach back to the elders before them. And those elders reach back to the elders before them. But so they have progressed.
But
these elders have progressed.
Right. But because it's not overly reliant on dead text.
Yes.
It is kept more alive, and it is embodied in persons. It's incarnated.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's marked by respect for the elder. Like, it starts with that, right? Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. So look at Shari. I think this is actually a really good insight. This is important, because I think I think relates to the conversation that we were having with Paul Kingsnorth. Because let's not look at, if we want to look at a better way to deal with the machine, I think we'd be better off looking at what native cultures have done than looking at what the Amish are doing. Right. So I think of that impulse of
I don't like what the Amish are doing, to be honest, or the Hutterites.
Right, exactly. Because I don't either. Yeah. But if you look at what the natives are doing, the natives are like, they're looking at the new and their traditions, and they're evaluating, and they're trying to make decisions in the present about what's best for them.
But I think the other part, the problem is, and I see this a little bit in Paul, is that, I was like this. This is why I see it. I was like this 25 years ago, thinking that seeing what's coming, right, with the machine, or whatever you want to call it,
and he's right about what's coming.
He is, but to think that the antidote to that is, going back to the tradition, which, excuse me, the reason things are coming like this is because the tradition failed. Okay. So
modernity happened for a reason, folks.
Well, and so for instance, so when Mary Grove closed, I was applying for some jobs at colleges, even though I didn't want one that much. And some of the Catholic colleges, because I'm accustomed to teaching in small liberal arts colleges, I like that environment. And they were, a lot of them like, would you be willing to swear your allegiance to the magisterium of the church? I'm like, no. No, I wouldn't, actually. So I just couldn't do it. I'm sorry. I refuse to join a group that would have me as one of its members.
There's another aspect to this idea of tradition too, when I think about First Nations, for example, because it's also tied to place.
Mm-hmm.
Like they have their traditional territory, and I'm remembering something, and I don't remember where I heard it. Maybe you know, Nate, about fairies not being visible to people who are from another place.
I haven't heard that.
Okay, where did I? Oh, I know.
But that makes sense.
This is that book, Commonwealth, the Commonwealth of. I read an article by David Bentley Hart in First Things.
Secret Commonwealth.
Okay.
Yeah, and in there, when the English went to Newfoundland, he uses this as an example.
Oh, it's in the article, yeah.
Yeah, they reported back that there were no fairies there.
Right.
But the reason that there are no fairies there is because they're not from Newfoundland. You have to be native to the place.
You're not going to see.
Then you see the fairies. Okay, so, and I don't know, that just never really left me alone after I read it. I thought there's something really important about place.
This also ties to the way Martin Shaw talks about story.
Yeah.
Where he talks about that, like that story is actually like overheard from the land, like overheard, like it's not just human. Like there's something like it. A story is
creation is telling it.
Right.
Creation tells the story.
Right.
We reiterate it.
Right. And I think we also, this is where, and this ties into the McDonald and the imagination. It's like, I think we cooperate with it and co-create.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I should probably get going, guys, because the sun finally came out and stopped raining, and I have 2 colonies of bees that want to get into their new houses.
Oh yeah, well,
they're in a cardboard.
Don't want to make
right
them
now.
mad.
They're
I had it. It's interesting. There was something in this chapter that Tomberg was talking about. Oh, he was talking about bees in terms of talking about examples of the principle of cooperation and evolution.
Yeah.
And that made me like understand like why bees are always like used symbolically.
And plus,
within the church.
Plus, they're governed by a queen.
Yeah, they are.
It's a sociological hobby, I'll tell you that much.
There we go. All right.
Well, here's what's cool about it. I was just thinking about this today. The workers make the queen. They make queen cells, and the workers decide where they're going to make a queen. So it's actually a worker.
It's a democracy.
Worker egg. It's a worker egg that they turn into a queen.
Right.
So they get royal jelly, which is really. Talk about mystical, right?
Yeah, I know, Totally.
Yeah, we get the symbolism of bees on Grail Country.
Yeah, maybe we should talk about that one day with you, Michael.
Yeah. I'm gonna go install the ladies.
Well, go attend to your apiary.
I will.
Well, thank you for joining us today, Michael, Shari. I really enjoyed this one.
Me too.
I think we had some productive meanderings from the text, but we always brought it back to Tomberg's themes, and I think this is one of my favorites.
I had an image of us skating on my lake. That we have these times where in the early spring, if it gets warm enough during the day and then cold at night, the whole lake is skatable. Otherwise, only little bits of the lake are skatable. Today we skated the whole lake.
Yeah, absolutely. We really did. Thank you both so very much. Next time we will be reading the chapter. Funny. Talk to you both later.
Bye-bye.
Bye.